And we're going to determine who the bad guys are and the good guys in Syria. And I'm not sure anybody knows, but there are a group of bad guys who are trying to impose Sharia law on the Christians, force them to pay a punitive tax. While the world is focusing on chemical weapons, the Christians are facing intense persecution, guess what, from Muslims.
It's the latest example of Muslim attacks against Christians in countries throughout the Middle East. Ephraim Graham has the story.
Syrian Christians have supported the Assad regime because it has protected religious minorities over the years. Those days may be coming to an end.
Many analysts tend to believe that as you weaken the regime, you also strengthen radical Islamists who are fighting the regime, who will have their say and are having their say in the so-called liberated areas of Syria in the north and elsewhere, where they're imposing Islamic rule.
That's what happened in Egypt when the Muslim Brotherhood took over. Even though the Brotherhood has been weakened by military intervention, supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi still wreak havoc on Christians in the south.
The church was surrounded on all sides, and the people surrounding the church were armed. They couldn't be less than 1,000, totally surrounding the church, carrying weapons.
In the Christian town of Dalga, a monastery was destroyed by enraged supporters of Morsi. The ancient door was vandalized and other nearby churches were burned.
We still don't have a church to pray at. We are still trying to clean them up. We have 4 churches in the area and we cannot pray in any of them.
The Muslim Brotherhood in Dalga is also imposing a tax on Christians. It's called a jizya tax. According to author and translator Raymond Ibrahim, jizya is the money or tribute that conquered non-Muslims historically had to pay to their Islamic overlords, with willing submission and while feeling themselves subdued to safeguard their existence. It's already starting to happen in Syria. When rebels took over the ancient Christian town of Malula, witnesses say they gave a Christian shop owner 3 options: pay a $70,000 jizya tax, convert, or die.
Many fear what will happen in Syria will be a replay of what happened. The Christian community of Iraq, which also, like the Christian community in Syria, has played such an important role in the heritage and culture and the perceptions of tolerance in those countries, had to flee because they were targeted by radical Islamists as well.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's something that we need to look at, and regrettably, I don't expect anything good to come out of the Obama administration in relation to defending the rights of Christians in the Middle East. It just won't happen. They'll come down on the side of the Brotherhood, or they'll come down on the side of the radicals, and they'll say, well, we're helping the, quote, moderate Islamic. Yeah, there are none in that particular struggle. Well, the United States is still looking for a diplomatic way out of the standoff of Syria's chemical weapons. John Jessup now has that story from Washington.
Secretary of State John Kerry is in Geneva today for high-stakes talks with Russia's foreign minister. The 2-day summit centers around the Russian-backed plan for Syria to hand over its chemical weapons stockpile to the international community. But Russian President Vladimir Putin says he won't support a military strike against Syria if Damascus doesn't comply. In an opinion piece in the New York Times, Putin criticized America's use of force in the Middle East. Putin writes, "The world sees America not as a model of democracy, but as relying solely on brute force." Today's talks began as reports surfaced that the U.S. has been sending small arms like machine guns to the rebels in Syria. Obamacare is proving unpopular even with some of the president's political allies in the labor movement. The AFL-CIO has approved a resolution criticizing parts of the new law in spite of efforts by the White House or White House officials to discourage the group from making its concerns so prominent. The strongly worded resolution says the health care law will drive up the costs of union-sponsored health plans to the point that workers and employers are forced to abandon them. Labor unions still support the goals of Obamacare to cut health care costs and provide coverage to all Americans, but it says the law as it stands now will hurt union health plans. Detroit recently became the largest city in American history to go bankrupt, but dozens of other cities are also hurting financially. And that means important upgrades to roads, bridges, and electrical and water systems are being pushed to the side. But there may be a solution. where cities can work together with businesses to bring in more money and get the upgrades they so desperately need. Caitlin Burke has that story.
Across the country, more and more cities struggle to pay their bills. Obligations from payroll to health care to pension funds squeeze already shrinking budgets.
But there is a solution, a way to make those desperately needed infrastructure updates without using government money. It's called public-private partnerships.
Critical infrastructure projects often get sidelined. The result? Crumbling highways, outdated water systems, and electric grids that can't keep up.
Under a partnership, private sector will come and do the investment, so it's not on the books of the public sector. It's a private sector debt.
Richard Norman says these partnerships can improve the quality of a wide range of services.
We use partnerships for transportation, that's an obvious one. But for energy systems, water systems, real estate and economic development, housing, hospitals, schools, I mean, it's almost endless supply.
Poor maintenance contributes to that growing need, and new building projects rarely make it to a city's drawing board. Private investors can replace that aging infrastructure and provide state-of-the-art services. There's a big need in New York City. Engineer Mitch Simpler calls the Big Apple's electrical infrastructure insufficient.
Con Ed has the same issue that the rest of the utilities have, which is, they had never envisioned the kind of electrical growth that the city has experienced. And the good news is the city is growing. We are building more buildings, all of whom need a significant amount of power, and Con Ed is doing their very best to deliver it. But it's a finite resource, and their infrastructure has finite capabilities. Because of all that, their utility rates are extraordinary. And it's, again, because of the rates that they have to charge to cover this infrastructure upgrade, not making it more reliable, more robust, simply to be able to keep pace with the increasing demand.
Former New York Governor George Pataki says the stage is set for private investors to step in with financially effective solutions.
What I hope we do far more of in New York and in the country going forward is empower private companies with tremendous expertise, and not just the expertise, but also billions of dollars that they want to invest in infrastructure projects to work with the public sector to come up with both financially better, more effective, and quicker solutions to the infrastructure problem.
The need exists, and the private funding is there. Now it's up to state and local leaders to get on board and take advantage of the opportunity. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
A federal judge has dismissed a lawsuit to remove the national motto, "In God We Trust," from U.S. coins and currency. Atheist groups and individuals argued it conveys a religious message that violates the separation of church and state. The judge wrote that the Supreme Court has repeatedly assumed the motto's secular purpose and effect, and that federal appeals courts have found no constitutional violation in the motto's inclusion on currency. The American Center for Law and Justice filed an amicus brief in the suit, representing 41 members of Congress. Jay Sekulow of the ACLJ says courts have repeatedly rejected similar challenges brought by atheists. And Pat, we know that the ACLJ's main argument here was that it's a historical fact that the nation was founded on a belief in God, and that the First Amendment doesn't require scrubbing all references to God.
There's no question about it. And, I believe in freedom. We all need freedom and freedom of speech, free rights. That's one of the foundations of our liberty. But we don't have to strip out the rights of all believers in order to satisfy a tiny minority that doesn't believe in anything. And the number of atheists is just tiny in relation to the rest of the population. We are a religious people. We believe in God. And there's no reason why we shouldn't make that known in our public pronouncements. And so the Supreme Court, thank goodness, has said that's true. Well, praise the Lord.
The atheists are so loud, though,
they are.
And they might be 1%.
But it's so tiny, the people who don't believe in anything. I mean, why should we give up our rights just because they don't believe in anything? Well, we'd be offended. Well, tough luck.
New satellite images suggest North Korea is restarting its nuclear activity. A member of a U.S. research institute says the country is back at work on a plutonium reactor, But the new revelation is not a surprise. Pyongyang announced its plan back in April. It was one of the many threats made to the U.S. and South Korea after the country faced tough international censure over its nuclear and rocket tests. The reactor was closed back in 2007 under the terms of a disarmament agreement. Thousands of bikers from around the country filled the streets of Washington, D.C. Wednesday in a ride to honor the victims of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The group, called 2 Million Bikers to D.C., planned to have a no-stop ride through the nation's capital, but they were denied a permit by the National Park Service and the Metropolitan Police Department. The bikers circled the Beltway and went into the streets of D.C. in smaller groups. The ride was initially organized to protest a Muslim march. You can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.